We are continuing our high school football preview on SpOKen Freely. I am Glenn Brockenbush. As you can clearly see, I am at one of my favorite places in the world, Generic Football Stadium, to talk some high school football. And we have been doing this show for over 2 years now, and I am just so grateful, first and foremost, to everybody who has watched, listened, supported this. Thank you so much. This is just something I enjoy doing, just a labor of love. And for 3 years, we have done a season preview with various people, various media personalities, but it would not feel complete if I didn't have one particular guest. Because what's fun? What is the fun in talking and previewing sports? We're not going to do predictions. And if there's one person who really likes predicting things and being right, that's all he wants in the world, is Kevin Green of the Claremore Progress. Kevin, thanks for doing this, man.
Hey, I'm always happy to come on, and me and you can go on about high school football for hours at a time. So,
yeah, sometimes to our detriment. I'm almost certain that at any point Zoom is gonna give me a warning, be like, "Hey, your meeting's almost over." I'm like, "But we're not done yet," because that's how these things go. We will try to be as brief as possible, but no guarantees. Another high school football season upon us. It was a weird off season, and by weird I mean this might be, and you are by far more the experienced Okie than I am, having lived here for 25 some odd years, but like this feels like the weirdest high school football off season maybe in history, at least in this state, that I can remember.
yeah, I would say that it's the transfer portal has come down into the high school ranks, and it being in Oklahoma is just strange because you don't really think of Oklahoma kind of being that way, so to speak, but it has definitely turned into that, and it is going to be interesting to see how especially like 6A1 shakes out, just because so many star players in that class in particular have just moved around.
Yeah, and I talked about this on a previous episode and just kind of in passing with people. It does feel like a reflection of our sporting society as a whole, and not to get like too philosophical here, but like the sports fan mentality, you see your favorite players leave all the time. If you've grown up with that, you didn't choose your school, you didn't choose what high school initially that you are districted to, that chose you. And so if you're a kid, you didn't choose to live in John Smith High School's district. You didn't choose that. And now in this age of player empowerment, this age of guys like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and Odell Beckham and players announcing a preference, you're going to see more high school, more younger guys saying, well, no, why can't I play over there? I want to play over there. I want to play with my friends. I don't think there's anything wrong with it personally. I guess from a purist standpoint, it's like, rah, you're ruining the game. What loyalty do they necessarily have to show? Is kind of my point on it. But I certainly didn't expect probably the biggest rivalry in all of Oklahoma high school football to get even more kindling thrown onto the fire. And if you've been living under a rock for 3 months, what I'm talking about is Shaker Rising, which I pronounced as Riesig for like 10 months, but I don't remember exactly if I was saying it correctly. I've been told it's Rising. And he led the Jinx Trojans as a freshman quarterback, led Jinx to a state title. Now, when I say led them, he had talent around him, but this was no babysitter operation. Like he could sling it. I had people on the Tulsa side of the state saying, no, this kid, watch, this kid is legit. And his first start as a varsity quarterback comes against Jinx's big rival, Tulsa Union. They make it to the state title game against Tulsa Union. He beats Tulsa Union. And then in May, we hear that it's pretty well known, like, lore now. And I say lore, it was 3 months ago, but it feels like this story has been told like umpteen times. One day, Shaker Rising is with his Jinx teammates at a camp. The next day, he is with the Union Redhawks, and he's not in action, but he's there. And sure enough, he not only left Jinx, but went to their most hated rival. And boy, oh boy, is that going to make the Backyard Bowl even more backyardier and bowlier. Those aren't words, but that one was the one that sent shockwaves. But then you would throw in things like Zadavian Sims, one of the best defensive linemen for the class of 2024 in the entire country, transferring from Texas to Durant, a program not known as a power. I believe they've gone about a decade without qualifying for the playoffs. And him, along with some other incoming freshmen and younger players, make the Lions an instant force to be reckoned with in 5A. You then have guys like Knox Dyson, who sees talent coming into Union like Shaker Rising and says, I guess I got to get out of here. He goes to Beggs. Austin Havens goes from Owasso. He had transferred in from another state. He is now at Bixby. And then, I could go on, and I might have a list, linked in the description or in this video at some point of the players that have transferred, some of the biggest names to transfer. But, another one that you are familiar with, because I watched him play Claremore early last season, Simeon Gilkey out of Bartlesville. He transfers, and that, he ends up at Union, or that, I believe that's where he transferred to. And that was wild. So I don't know. It's just, it boggles my mind. And one thing I asked Michael Knight of Prep Red Zone Oklahoma was, do you think that this is a sign of things to come? Do you think this starts a trend? Do you think this season was more of a one-off? What's your kind of take on that, Kev?
I think it's going to keep happening, just depending on the talent at the top, because, nowadays it just seems like parents are more willing to do anything to make sure that their kid plays possibly all 4 years or is the starter every time they get the opportunity. So they're going to be more willing to pack everything up and move a town over just so their kid can play, And if let's say you're like the kid at Jinx who was a freshman, leads them to the state championship, and then all of a sudden this new kid comes in and he's a freshman, he's from California, and you're like, well, shoot, now is my son going to get to play, for the rest of his high school career, despite winning a state championship, because that should be like the ultimate, you're safe kind of thing there. But if somebody's better than you, it doesn't matter if you won a state championship before. So I think it can definitely still happen. There just happens to be a ton of talent this year, and I think it'll still keep happening. Maybe not to this extent, because this is just crazy. what has happened this offseason? I mean, when you get a kid moving from California to Jinx and then leaving Jinx back to California, leaving Jinx with an inexperienced quarterback, you don't see that.
Yeah, no, it is. I don't remember the timeline exactly if Jackson Presley moved in from California before or after the Shaker Rising deal. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, this is a kid who's class of 2026. And for those not great at math, that means he was an 8th grader last year. And this kid was already getting offers from the University of North Texas and at Florida State. And Texas A&M never played varsity football. Never play, as far as I know. I don't know the rules at certain schools if you can play high school athletics when you're younger than a high school student. But I mean, if he moved in and you are, like you said, if you're a quarterback at Jinx, you're like, well, this feels, it's almost like Toy Story. Like, I'm being replaced. You're the cool new toy. I need to protect and look out for me. And then he moves back to California. And so I don't know. I don't know. If I think it might continue to go on kind of like this, like you said. I don't know if it's going to be as rampant or as earth shaking as something like Shaker Rising going to their arch rival, because that is the rivalry in the state. I know there are a lot of good rivalries, but that is, for all intents and purposes, the rivalry. And for him to cross that divide made a lot of people mad and really going to heat things up. I believe they play week 2. I know they play early in the season each year. That is, yeah, that was a big one. And then the other big talking point for high school football in Oklahoma came
I want to add one more
sorry.
thing. I think it's also important to point out that this kind of thing probably happens every year on a large scale. It's just we're only hearing about it because this is top tier athlete that is happening.
Yeah, no, the Zadavian Sims deal, I think, really kicked it up a notch. But we've had good players transfer before. Jaden Carroll, the running back at Jinx, he was at Booker T. Washington a couple of years ago. I remember the name. And then you are obviously familiar with, a guy like Deshaun Kennard transferring, I believe, was it to Owasso middle of the season.
Yeah, after the second game of the year, less than a week after rushing for nearly 300 yards. Yeah.
And then speaking of Owasso, last year, the Chris McClellan one, I did forget about that. Him going from Tulsa Edison to Owasso. That felt big last year. And it was as if, high school football 2022 looked at high school football 2021 and said, hold my beer and watch this. And it absolutely adds a storyline. I don't know if in terms of there was another point that I had regarding this, but it's like I do think that in some ways it is going to it's going to shake things up, but it is going to I think you're going to see college coaches in this age of the transfer portal. I think previously you might see coaches look at a kid who transferred and see it almost as a negative, like, wait, he left one school and went to the other? Why? What happened? What's wrong? And now I think it's just kind of par for the course, and it might not bother people as much. Now, if you go to like 4 schools in 3 years, that's a little different, perhaps. But you have families that move for reasons beyond the kid's control. You have military towns. We're very familiar with that in the Lawton Fort Sill area, or you're from Midwest City, you got Tinker there, and you have kids. Lawton Eisenhower, as a kid, moved in from North Carolina this year, happens to be 300 pounds. That I think in other situations you might say, well, that's fishy. Kid can't. You move from North Carolina to Lawton Eisenhower, with all due respect to the Ike Eagles and Devon Harris. If you were just trying to get a leg up and trying to do recruiting and things like that, that's not what that feels like to me. I don't think that's that kind of situation. I think those are, we saw that a couple of years ago at Lawton with Chateau Reed, a kid who came from Alaska, I believe, was retired military, wanted to retire, but was in went to a military town in Lawton. He said, hey, my kid's pretty good at football and track if you want him to play. And he's now with the Baylor Bears. So, I think you're going to see parents who want their kids in this day and age with less state funding for colleges. You're going to see parents, and you've seen it for a decade and a half now, but parents that are like, my kid needs a scholarship, my kid needs a scholarship. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on the kid. And especially when you have 8th graders being talked about and invited to recruiting trips, which I'm not a parent, but if I have a 14-year-old and he gets invited to, XYZ University's recruiting pool party, I don't know if I want my kid hanging out at a pool with a bunch of college football players. Like, that's just me. I'm not saying anything about any particular school. That's just, it's weird. and I think it's only going to continue.
Yeah.
Well, the other big point that really, as I was, other big talking point, I feel like in the state heading into the high school football season came down from the OSEA just a few weeks before the season started. And it was, I don't have it in front of me, but the gist is essentially that any school, coach, player, or fan base that engages in unsportsmanlike conduct, there are going to be harsher punishments. And I think the reaction was, for the most part, positive, because let's be honest, no fan in particular thinks that they're the villain. That no fan is gonna be like, no, I wanted to swear at the refs. Like that, those things just kind of happen, I feel like, and no fan thinks of them as being in the wrong. They believe that their team has been wronged. A coach feels like his team has been wronged. And I think most forward-thinking people understand that we have a shortage in referees in Oklahoma for a reason, and that while all of us would like to see games refereed perfectly, officiated perfectly, it's a hard job. And you and I have discussed at length at dinners, lunches, while working together about bad fan behavior that we've seen, or coaches kind of out of control, or players, hounding refs. You're 16 years old and talking down to a grown man. That doesn't sit right with me. And I think that if you are going to engage in those kind of behaviors, there should be, there should be consequences. And the question remains, what will the results of this be? Will they have the intended results in terms of having better fan behavior or more conscience from coaches and players in terms of referee abuse? Do you think that it will have a positive effect this year?
I think in some sports it will, maybe not with football as much, because I just feel like that would be a lot harder to regulate because there's a lot more people in the stands. But in terms of like basketball, which is where I hear the most idiocy from from parents and fans, I for sure think that it'll help, because nobody wants to be embarrassed by being the one who's kicked out and never able to come back into the gym. So.
Yeah, the OSSA Board Policy 5 states that anytime an egregious act of unsportsmanlike conduct occurs 2 or more times during the same season at the same school in the same activity, the team and/or individual will be suspended from participation in said activity for the remainder of the season. Egregious acts will be defined as instances not within the OSSA adopted rules of the contest. It's going to be very interesting, and I think that how they define egregious acts, examples of fans entering the playing surface, which you don't see a lot of, I don't think, fighting, verbally attacking officials. The question to me becomes, what are they going to define as verbally attacking? Because you can hear fans question something without using profanity or without using, insulting, name-calling language. That still doesn't feel good to hear that. So I don't know. I think it'll have a positive effect. I agree with you. I think in football it's going to be more targeted towards coaches and players. I think that's where you're going to see it more.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.